Hello and welcome to Indus News, live from Islamabad. I am Muneeb Hamid with the news of this hour. Let's begin with the top stories first. The Taliban claim they have seized the key Chaman-Spin-Buldak border crossing with Pakistan. Spokesperson Zabiullah Mujahid says they have taken over the border town of Wesh in Kandahar province. But Interior Ministry spokesperson PAK-AFGHAN says Kabul has repelled fighters from the critical transit point. Pakistan's foreign minister says Afghanistan's stability has a clear bearing on regional security in the SCO space. Shami Qureshi was addressing the Shanghai Cooperation Organization's Council for Foreign Ministers in Dushanbe. He said Islamabad has played its part in facilitating an Afghan-led and owned peace process. Indian forces have martyred 3 more civilians in occupied Jammu and Kashmir. The youths were targeted during an operation in the Pulwama district. The forces have also suspended internet services in the area. Brazil has reported more than 1,600 daily deaths from COVID-19 and over 45,000 cases. In Australia, the lockdown in Sydney has been extended by at least 14 days. Meanwhile, Pakistan has reported 24 more deaths and nearly 2,000 new cases overnight. Globally, the coronavirus has claimed more than 4 million lives and infected over 187 million people so far. Well, these were the top stories. News in detail is coming after a short break. Stay with us. Welcome back. Now let's have the news in detail. Start from Afghanistan, where the Taliban claim they have seized the key Chaman-Spin-Buldak border crossing with Pakistan. Spokesperson Zabiullah Mujahid says they have taken over the border town of Wesh in Kandahar province. However, the Afghan government says it has repelled the fighters from the border crossing. Meanwhile, Britain says it will work with the Taliban should they come to power in Afghanistan. In an interview, Defence Minister Ben Wallace said the United Kingdom will, however, review any relationship if the group violates human rights. Earlier, China urged the Taliban to make a clean break with all terrorist forces and return to mainstream Afghan politics. Now, we have been joined by retired Brigadier Imran Malik, defence analyst. Now, Mr. Imran, after this recent statement from London, do you believe the West is slowly making peace with the possibility of a Taliban-led future government in Afghanistan?
Thank you very much for having me on your program. I think, yes, as I probably discussed earlier as well, the writing is on the wall now. Whether we have a peace process bringing in an Afghan national government, or whether the Taliban make a run for Kabul and take over the city and the country, I think it is a fact now that the Taliban will either form the government by themselves, and even if it is a coalition government, they will have the most dominant part or the most major part of that government. So the world is slowly, gradually coming to the realization that they will have to deal with the Taliban one way or the other once they take over Kabul. And I think the Britishers are perhaps the first ones to have acknowledged this, and even President Joe Biden in his press conference had indicated that he would not be too averse, let's say, to dealing with the Taliban.
Right. Also, Brigadier Imran, over the past 2 weeks, the Taliban appear to be keener to capture border towns, especially the ones that serve as trade and transit conduits. What could be the objective behind this strategy?
I think that's a great observation, because there is a clear-cut strategic pattern in the way the Taliban are increasing or expanding their control over the country. We see that they've taken over the major trade and border crossings in the north with Tajikistan, in the west with Turkmenistan, in the southwest with Iran, and now they've come and taken over Spin Boldak. I mean, although news reports say that the fighting is still continuing there, but they seem to have attained a control and operating control over the road leading from Chaman to Spin Boldak and on to Kandahar. Simultaneously, they are also attacking and establishing control over the central districts. And clearly, Kabul is also coming under pressure. So there might be a sense of isolation that might be dawning on to the people in Kabul, that all the major crossings with their immediate neighbors have been taken over by the Taliban, and the central districts too are under great pressure. So I think the Taliban are moving in with a proper military strategy sort of a thing, and and their juggernaut seems to be unstoppable at the moment.
Right, so lastly, there are reports of a possibility of a transitional government being considered in the recently reinvented Doha talks. President Ghani reached out to his political opponent Hamid Karzai amid heavy losses to Afghan forces a couple of days ago, and now a delegation of the opposition politicians to Doha. Do you see any possibility of a transitional government being agreed, and more importantly, would that be the right thing to do?
I think perhaps that is the best option for Afghanistan as a whole, as a country and as a nation. Because a transitional government through a peace process probably would meet the requirements of not only the one government, but the neighboring countries as well as the international community. However, as I said earlier, it will be quite difficult for the Taliban to just compromise with people they've been fighting for the last 20 years. And as I said earlier, whatever way the next government is formed, the Taliban will have to be the most dominant part of it. Otherwise, their entire efforts will be fruitless, and they'll all go in vain. So I personally think that the Taliban, whatever talks or parleys they have wherever, Doha or anywhere else, they will probably dictate their terms. They will take over the country, they will form the government, and they will also get people from other representatives from other ethnicities and other sectarian groups and other linguistic groups as well, other regions as well, to form a coalition government. At least the face they put up in front of the international community will be one of a whole of a nation government, a government representing the entire Afghanistan and all its people. So I think whatever talks that take place will eventually bring the Taliban into power, and if they fail, they'll probably make a rush or a run for Kabul.
Well, let's just hope for peace in Afghanistan. Brigadier retired Imran Malik, defense analyst from Lahore, thank you very much for your time. Now moving on, Pakistan's foreign minister says Afghanistan's stability has a clear bearing on regional security in the SEO space. Shah Mahmood Qureshi was addressing the Shanghai Cooperation Organization's Council for Foreign Ministers in Dushanbe. He said Islamabad has played its part in facilitating an Afghan-led and owned peace process. Qureshi called upon all Afghan parties to engage constructively and work for a negotiated political solution. The foreign minister expressed concern over US withdrawal in the absence of a peace deal. He also discussed the Afghan situation with his Russian counterpart, Sergei Lavrov. The foreign minister pledged a long-term and multifaceted relationship with Moscow. Now, Indian forces have martyred 3 more civilians in occupied Jammu and Kashmir. The youths were targeted during an operation in the Pulwama district. The forces have also suspended internet services in the area. The troops have carried out hundreds of extrajudicial murders during their so-called cordon and search operations. Riot scripts say Indian occupying forces have martyred at least 400 Kashmiris since August 2019. Now moving to South Africa, where the death toll in unrest following the jailing of former President Jacob Zuma has risen to 72. Police clashed with the charged crowds who ransacked or set ablaze shopping malls across the nation. Authorities say among the victims were 10 who died in a stampede in the town of Soweto. The police said they have arrested over 1,200 people in the last few days. In a statement, the police said they have also identified 12 suspects of provoking riots. Soldiers have been deployed onto the streets in Zuma's home province, KwaZulu-Natal, and in Gauteng. The African Union has condemned the deadly violence and called for urgent restoration of order. Moving on now, another rocket attack has targeted the U.S. military base in Syria's Deir ez-Zor province. Syrian state media says this is the second such incident at the Al Omar oil field in 24 hours. However, it gave no reports on the casualties or damage. The U.S. forces fighting in Syria and Iraq have not commented on the incident so far. Last week, the same field was targeted with drones. Now, the UAE has opened an embassy in Israel, becoming the first Gulf state to do so after the normalization of relations last year. At the flag-raising ceremony, UAE's envoy hailed potential opportunities between Abu Dhabi and Tel Aviv. Meanwhile, Israel's President Isaac Herzog said the event is an important milestone for regional prosperity. The embassy is situated in the Tel Aviv Stock Exchange building. Its opening followed the inauguration of Tel Aviv's embassy in Abu Dhabi last month. Moving on now, U.S. prosecutors have charged 4 Iranians with plotting to kidnap a New York journalist critical of Tehran. They have been accused of being Iranian intelligence operatives. Prosecutors say the Iranians hired private investigators under false pretenses to surveil the journalist in Brooklyn. A U.S. attorney for New York said the defendants planned to forcibly take their intended victim to Iran. FBI's counterintelligence division says Tehran directed the operation as retaliation for freedom of expression. Meanwhile, the State Department says the U.S. is engaged in indirect but active talks to secure the release of U.S. detainees in Iran. Now, Brazil has reported more than 1,600 daily deaths from COVID-19 and over 45,000 cases. Globally, the virus has claimed more than 4 million lives and infected over 187 million people. More about the pandemic in this report.
The European continent that emerged relatively victorious against COVID-19 at the start of this year has now been clutched by the Delta variant. In Portugal, authorities say all cases in Lisbon and Algarve regions are of the Delta variant. Spain's caseload has surpassed 4 million as the strain drives a surge of infections among the unvaccinated young people. German Chancellor Angela Merkel has warned that more people need to be vaccinated in the country before restrictions could be lifted. Meanwhile, French health workers are furious about President Emmanuel Macron's orders to get vaccinated or go home.
I don't understand why they want to force us to get vaccinated, knowing that we have rights in France. We are in a supposedly free country, liberty, equality, fraternity. So if that changes, I think they should also change the motto. You can say this is becoming a dictatorship because we are forced to do things that we do not want to do.
Italy has approved the temporary distribution of an antibody treatment by Britain's GlaxoSmithKline and US company Vir Biotechnology. While in Greece, authorities said customers at indoor restaurants must furnish proof of vaccination. In Australia, Sydney's lockdown has been extended by at least 14 days after 3 weeks of initial curbs could not contain the outbreak.
And it always hurts to say this, but we need to extend the lockdown at least a further 2 weeks, from Friday the 16th of July to Friday the 30th of July. That includes home learning. However, we'll obviously assess the situation at the end of those 2 weeks and provide information beyond that. We are prioritising vaccinating aged care workers and teachers in those key local government areas.
South Korea has reported yet another record daily rise in COVID-19 cases, with more than 1,600 testing positive. Bangladesh is set to lift its nationwide lockdown for religious festival Eid al-Adha, even as new infections rise.
Meanwhile, Pakistan has reported 24 more deaths due to coronavirus and nearly 2,000 new cases. The Health Ministry says the toll has risen to 22,642. It said the country's positivity rate has once again surged to 4.17%. The ministry says out of nearly 41,000 active cases, more than 2,200 are critical. Pakistan has logged over 978,000 cases so far, while more than 915,000 people have recovered nationwide. Pakistan's Prime Minister Imran Khan will be paying an official two-day visit to the Republic of Uzbekistan from July 15th. The Foreign Ministry says he has been invited by Uzbek President Shavkat Mirziyoyev. The Prime Minister will be accompanied by a high-level delegation, including the Foreign Minister. The office says international issues and bilateral relations, especially trade, will be on the agenda. A number of agreements are expected to be signed aimed at deepening bilateral cooperation in diverse areas. The Prime Minister will also address the first Pakistan-Uzbekistan Business Forum. More news coming up after a short break. Stay with us. Welcome back now. The UN has called for accountability of those behind enforced disappearances in Syria in the past decade. The Human Rights Council adopted a resolution with 26 in favour, 6 against and 15 abstentions. The resolution was presented by several European countries, the US, Turkey and Qatar. It decried that Syria's crisis has entered a second decade marked by gross violations. The text condemned what it called consistent human rights violations and abuses by the Syrian regime. It also criticized other parties to the conflict but said the Syrian government is the main perpetrator. The war in Syria has killed nearly 500,000 people since it started in 2011, with all sides accused of war crimes. Now in Cuba, a man has died in Havana during unprecedented anti-government protests that have shaken the island. The Interior Ministry said the 36-year-old man was part of a group that attacked a government facility. Global watchdog NetBlocks says Cuba has restricted access to social media and messaging platforms. At a news conference, Foreign Minister Bruno Rodriguez termed the U.S. blockade on Cuba cruel and deliberate. Meanwhile, in the U.S. state of Florida, protesters blocked a major highway to express support for Cuban demonstrators. The Miami area has long been home to the largest Cuban exile community and a focal point for the anti-Castro sentiment. Now in China, the death toll in the partial collapse of a hotel in Jiangsu, Suzhou city has risen to 17. Authorities say they have ended the search and rescue mission. The local government said 23 people had been pulled from the rubble and just 6 survived. It said preliminary investigations found the collapse was triggered by an unauthorized renovation. More than 600 personnel, including earthquake rescue teams and 120 vehicles, were mobilized for the operation. Now, the Russian army has sent planes to battle huge wildfires that have blanketed Siberian towns in thick smoke. Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu said President Vladimir Putin ordered the ministry to assist local authorities. He said the fire risk has flared up across the entire country because of the abnormal heat wave. Meanwhile, the residents complain of being suffocated by the smoke as the region swelters under a heat wave. The flames have torn across some 800,000 hectares of Russian forest. The fires have also raised fears about permafrost and peatland thawing, releasing carbon long stored in the frozen tundra. Now in the Emmy Awards TV series, The Crown and The Mandalorian are leading the nominations. HBO and HBO Max led all networks with 130 nominations, followed by Netflix with 129. The British royal series The Crown and Disney Plus Star Wars spin-off drama The Mandalorian both got 24 nominations. Apple TV Plus comedy Ted Lasso scored 20 nods. Best drama series contenders also include Bridgerton and Pose. The Emmy Awards will be handed out at a ceremony in Los Angeles on the 19th of September. Now, Britain's Royal Shakespeare Company has opened an outdoor theatre with a new version of the comedy of Errors. This is its first such full-scale production in front of a live audience in over a year. Let's find out more in this report.
Based in playwright William Shakespeare's birthplace of Stratford-upon-Avon, the RSC built the Lydia and Manfred Grovey Garden Theatre outside its Swan Theatre by the River Avon. The Comedy of Errors had been due to begin performances in April 2020, but the RSC had to close its doors to live audiences due to the COVID-19 pandemic. The production has been now adapted by director Philip Breen for a new temporary open-air venue.
Go back again and bring you beaten home! For God's sake, send some other messenger! Back!
You know, it's a beautiful spot here in Stratford. We're right by the river right here now, and so we get some heckling from some swans occasionally, all that kind of stuff. But I guess this is what happened 400 years ago. You know, there weren't too many roofs around and stuff like that in the theatre then. Now, one of my favourite things about doing this kind of stuff is that it feels sort of timeless, really.
The RSC's Garden Theatre can seat 500 people or 310 with social distancing.
I felt there are two really powerful reasons to build this theatre, one of which was as a sort of symbol, a symbol of regeneration and of opening up, but also as a transition, so that people will feel very comfortable sitting outside in the open air.
In London's West End, major productions including hit musicals such as Jersey Boys and The Lion King have been waiting for July 19th to be able to fully reopen, as operating at 50% capacity is not financially viable.
Now, European stocks have pulled back slightly following the higher-than-expected US inflation report. London's FTSE is leading the losses, dipping over 0.5%. The CAC 40 in Paris and the Pan-European Stock 600 have slipped marginally. Frankfurt's DAX and Italy's FTSE MIB have also edged fractionally lower. Earlier, all Asian stocks traded lower with the exception of Australia's ASX 200. Let's take you live to Dushanbe, where Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi is addressing the Foreign Ministers' Contact Group for Afghanistan.
Some member states have already completed withdrawal. Peace process is moving at an imperceptible pace. The level of violence has escalated, resulting in increased loss of lives and infrastructure destruction. Reports indicate that many Afghans are migrating in search for safety and security. The hope to achieve sustainable peace is flickering. If military confrontation between the Afghan sides persists, we foresee deeper instability, economic meltdown, a fresh wave of refugee influx in neighboring countries, and the rise in terrorism. So what are the options for us? Can we afford to look the other way while our neighbor Afghanistan faces stiffer challenges? I don't think this is an option. Peace, prosperity and economic development of our region is interlinked. Our destinies remain intertwined. The hopes of a better future are contingent upon moving forward together on the road to peace, stability and progress. Excellencies, there are obvious limitations on how much Afghanistan's friends and partners can do. Ultimately, it is the Afghans themselves who have to act with wisdom and foresight and in the supreme interest of the Afghan nation. For our part, we can help through the following ways. Strongly emphasize the imperative of a negotiated political solution. Stress the importance of reduction in violence and of ceasefire. Continue our strong support for the Afghan peace process. Pursue Afghan parties to proceed on the negotiating table in a meaningful, time-bound and result-oriented way. Urge the parties to deliberate on future vision/roadmap for Afghanistan. Prevent spoilers from derailing the process. vow not to let Afghanistan become a proxy ground for regional ambitions, agree to respect the decisions taken by Afghans about their future, reaffirm support for long-term reconstruction and economic development of Afghanistan. The withdrawal of international forces presents an opportunity as well for the Afghan stakeholders to take decisive steps. The Afghan leaders must seize the moment, engage constructively, and work together to secure a negotiated settlement. An inclusive, broad-based and comprehensive political solution is indispensable. Excellencies, Pakistan's perspective has been clear. There is no other country more desirous of peace in Afghanistan than Pakistan, as no country is more deeply affected by instability in Afghanistan than Pakistan. We have no favorites in Afghanistan. We have pursued a policy of reaching out to all Afghan stakeholders and promoting a peaceful resolution. We assisted the US-Taliban direct negotiations that culminated in the peace agreement signed in Doha on the 29th of February 2020. We also facilitated subsequent intra-Afghan negotiations, all in good faith and as part of a shared responsibility. Bilaterally, we have engaged with the Afghan government to support deepening of trade and economic relations, opening of new border crossing points, revising customs and clearance procedures, and forging closer people-to-people contacts through revised visa policy. Having hosted over 3 million Afghan refugees for over 4 decades, we remain engaged for their return to their homeland with dignity and honor. We expect the international community to support these endeavors through a well-resourced and time-bound roadmap. Pakistan is also firmly committed to pursuing a geo-economic strategy for increased integration and connectivity in the region and beyond. Excellencies, our region's security is linked to the long borders we share with neighbors. Continued expansion of terrorist networks and extremist elements, nexus of narcotics and terrorism in the region, and unabated smuggling of humans and goods constitute major obstacles in realizing our common goals for peace and security. Presence of Daesh and merger of various terrorist organizations inside Afghanistan, such as TTP, ETIM, and other terrorist groups, have not only resulted in great human tragedy and political instability, but also continue to add to economic uncertainty in our otherwise rich and resourceful region. These terrorist outfits also threaten Afghanistan's neighboring countries. This is a scenario that all SCO members must work to change. We all share the burdens of decades of conflict in Afghanistan. It is essential to ensure that the mistakes of the past are not repeated and that sustained efforts are made for the eradication of terrorism and extremism in all forms and manifestations from the region. Excellencies, establishment and continuation of peace is strongly underpinned by economic growth and human development, domestically and regionally. An inclusive political settlement will be a win-win outcome for Afghanistan and all the countries in the region. It will yield an integrated and connected region, a dividend yearned for by Afghans and others. At the cusp of this historic juncture in Afghanistan, let us maximize our cooperation and coordination to support the Afghan people. This is the time that friends and partners of Afghanistan must remain closely engaged to advance shared goals and objectives. I thank you.
That was Foreign Minister of Pakistan, Mr. Shah Mahmood Qureshi, addressing the SCO group on Afghanistan. And during his address to the SCO contact group on Afghanistan, he once again said military confrontation should cease and peace talks should move on. And he also said Pakistan can help, and Pakistan has been helping, and Pakistan is continuously willing to help peace in Afghanistan and also to bring forth the spoilers who are trying for achieving instability in Afghanistan. We'll keep you updated with this news and all the latest from around the world. Keep watching Indus News.